right, the next cool thing that we want to talk about is microprofiles. Go ahead.
Yeah, so MicroProfile, as I mentioned, is kind of like it's the way it describes itself is optimizing enterprise Java for a microservices architecture. You don't have to care about any of those words. I mean, optimizing is good and Java is good, but the rest, what it really is that it adds good capabilities for primarily for writing REST services, but it's really just nice kind of next level features on top of some of these other things. So I talked before about how um, a lot of the power of this system comes in where you combine things. So JAX-RS will let you validate incoming parameters and will let you admit JSON, that sort of thing. So that combination brings things together that are much more powerful than they would be individually. And then MicroProfile is similar in that it says, okay, we have this baseline. So we have these REST services, we have this notion of injecting dependencies and beans and these things like that. What can we do on top of that? And moreover, and there are a couple of these, what common problems can we solve? So MicroProfile is a collection of specs, and I've implemented a good number of them in here. Some of them are very immediately useful in XPages applications. Some of them are more speculative, where it's more of the sort of thing where you see, oh, I can do this. What can I build with that? Where it's not something where, man, I really wish I had a way to do X. It's more of like, I didn't even know I should be doing this. Like there are a couple of things here that I haven't worked in yet, but it's like, I can now. And this makes sense as a thing. Like the fact that this exists taught me that it's something that I should be doing. Yes. And a couple of them fall into that category. So I'll start out with config. So this plays into what I had talked about previously with CDI, where you have your managed beans, but then you also have the ability to inject things into them based on whatever you want to do. MicroProfile config is an application of that. And the way it works is that in your bean, you'd say, okay, this is an application scope bean. So that part so far, just like XPages, and you'd say inject. So this is similar to manage properties. But what you're saying is I want this specifically to be a configuration property named java.version. And so what this does is it says, it has this config producer that says, I know about certain ways of finding configuration properties, and I'm being vague about this intentionally, ways of finding configuration properties, can any of them produce something called java.version? And it goes through and it says, one of the ways I know about is reading a Java system property. So java.version is a standard property available in the Java virtual machine that tells you the Java version. Another way that I've added in is looking in xsp.properties. So the properties file that configures your XPages app, that happens to list, among other things, the XPages libraries that depends on. In that properties file, that's called xsp.library.depends. So I say, give me this, and I've written in this framework something that knows how to read xsp.properties. Similarly, directory with a capital D, that's from notes INI. So here it's saying, give me this property. So it has this cascading notion of there are various sources, and some of them are going to be environment variables. Some of them are going to be custom, like the notes INI thing. You can add your own. For example, you could have it so that, there's a very, very common idiom in Domino where you'll have a view that is a key value list of configuration options. So almost every client I've ever worked with has one of these. I've written many of these. I've done it different ways where it'll be one document that has many options in it, or it'll be one document per option, whatever. Like it's user configurable options, and that's good. Like obviously you should have this, and it solves a lot of problems. You could tie it into this. You could have a provider that says config property of my custom property, and then you will have a class that will look up in your view and say, find the entry by key, get that value, and then return it. And then that will handle doing this. And so that way in your class, you don't need to look up in the view manually every time. You don't need to have an explicit object that you call. Like, there's obviously been script libraries that people will write that say, here's my configuration library, and do that. This will just say it's built in the same way everything else is. So the same way you could do other config properties, you can build into this system. And then now you can do multi-levels of indirection.
You just lost.
Okay.
I'm waiting for you to show me the code that goes and finds xsp.library.depends. Are you telling me you don't have to do that?
I mean, I can, but I don't have to. So that's just something that happens. So in the XPages Jakarta EE project, I wrote that custom provider. So like, MicroProfile
Oh,
doesn't give a crap about XSP properties, but I do. So I wrote a custom provider, and then when it's loading up, when you opt in to config, that's one of the ones that you get, because I figured that's a very convenient thing to be able to configure your application. But you could then write your own, and so that's where that would come in, where you'd have one that looks up from a view.
wow.
And you have some interesting capabilities there because they are priority based. And so, for example, you could say, is this in development mode? And XPages has the notion of development mode that is cascaded in this way, but it does it manually because it doesn't have this. And so you could say, is this app in development mode? And for example, you could have it so that it sprouts the XPages debug toolbar when it is, maybe it does some more logging, maybe whatever, like any number of things that you might do, like this is developer mode. And so there's a couple ways you could do that, but one way you could do it is you could decide on a property and then make it so that if it's present in xsp.properties, that wins. And then failing that, check to see, is there something on the file system that's set that way? Is there something in notes INI that's set that way? And so that way you'd have this option where, as you're developing it, you write that into xsp.properties. I'm in dev mode and I'm always in dev mode. But then you could change it. And then, if you really wanted to, you could have a custom thing that says, am I on a server in this organization? If so, yes. Otherwise,
Oh,
no.
wow.
And like,
Yeah.
you could go crazy. Like at that point, you could do whatever you want to do. But that way you could say, say you deploy it to a client and they want to turn on dev mode temporarily, but you don't want to tell them to install a bunch of stuff in Designer, then open the XPages app and click that, and then, oh no, it broke and now nothing works. You might tell them, set this INI property or notes INI property. You might tell them, set this thing on the file system or whatever, like some external thing where you'd say, now do this externally. The app will pick up on that and say, even though earlier I wasn't in dev mode, I see I am because of this notes INI property or whatever.
Like,
And then now
where
you
do
can
I
do
see
that.
the list of config values that are documented? That you've actually,
So there is a mechanism, I don't remember what it is offhand, where you can like query this programmatically. So you can say these are the ones. As far as the ones you are using, that documentation would really be in the code. So the fact that I'm using XSP library depends. And so like, because it is meant to be pluggable like that, like it's really just a string and it can come from anywhere. So if you were going to do this, you should probably have like a constants class that says, here are all of our config properties that we use. So that way that would be part, and put JavaDoc on there and all that sort of thing. And that will be part of your application. So there's
cool.
not currently a mechanism that says these are all the ones that are in the code. I could do that actually. In theory, that wouldn't actually be too bad.
Or somebody who's a member of the community could document that and post it on OpenNTF.
That's very true. Because one of the nice things about newer Java stuff is that it does a lot of work of inspecting what's there already. So a lot of the technology we talked about is built on, you have done this class, and like, so all these annotations is you write this class and then the framework handles looking at all this stuff. And like the JAX-RS part says, what are all the ones that have at path? CDI says, what are all the ones that have scopes?